They tried again to kill me. Not with sanctions and not with diplomatic pressure, but with the drone. I narrowly escaped a NATO drone strike named a Reaper MQ-9, flying at 2,000 feet, carrying 2 Hellfire missiles. Locked on my vehicle convoy as I traveled from Ouagadougou to a military base in the north. 17 days ago, I should have died. NATO tried to assassinate a sitting African president, and what happened next shocked them more than my survival. Let me tell you exactly what happened that night. Because this isn't speculation. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented fact. We have the radar data. We have the communications intercepts. We have the missile fragments. We have everything. It was 11:47 p.m. I was traveling with a small security detail, 3 vehicles, 12 personnel total. We were on a remote road, 40 kilometers from the nearest town. The kind of route where an explosion could be explained away as an accident, a mechanical failure, bad luck. That's what they were counting on. My head of security received an alert from our newly installed Chinese air defense radar system, the same system NATO said we didn't need, the same technology the West refused to sell us. The same capability they claimed was too sophisticated for African militaries to operate. That system just saved my life. The alert was clear: unidentified aircraft, high altitude, slow-moving pattern consistent with surveillance drone, loitering directly above our projected route, not passing through. Not conducting routine patrol. Loitering. Waiting. My security chief said, "Mr. President, we need to change route immediately." I said, "How certain are you?" He said, "The aircraft has been tracking us for 17 minutes. It adjusted position 3 times to maintain coverage of our convoy. This isn't coincidence. This is targeting." I made the decision in seconds. Divert now. Maximum evasive protocol. We turned off the main road, took a secondary route through rougher terrain, slower, less secure, but unpredictable, harder to track, harder to target. 4 minutes later, 2 Hellfire missiles struck our original route, exactly where we would have been if we hadn't diverted. The explosions destroyed a section of road and killed 3 civilians in a vehicle that had been traveling behind where our convoy should have been. 3 innocent people, dead, because NATO tried to kill me and missed. We recovered the missile fragments the next morning, analyzed them in our military laboratory, confirmed by independent experts from China and Russia, AGM-114, Hellfire missiles, American-made, fired from an MQ-9 Reaper drone, the same drones NATO operates across the Sahel under the guise of counter-terrorism operations. We also recovered something else, something they didn't expect us to find, something that proves this wasn't a mistake, wasn't an accident, wasn't a targeting error. Electronic signature data from the missile guidance systems, data that shows the missiles were locked on a moving target, data that shows course corrections consistent with tracking a vehicle convoy, data that proves these missiles were aimed at my convoy specifically, not at a fixed location. They tried to kill me, and they tried to make it look like an accident. I called an emergency meeting of my Security Council at 3 a.m. My military commanders, my intelligence chiefs, my closest advisors. I showed them everything. The radar data, the intercepts, the missile fragments, the electronic signatures. One of my generals said, "Mr. President, this is an act of war. We must respond militarily." I said, "No. We respond strategically. They expect military retaliation. They're prepared for that. They want that. Because then they can frame us as the aggressors. They can justify intervention. They can rally international support for regime change." I said, "We do something they don't expect. We expose them, completely, publicly, with evidence they can't deny." My intelligence chief said, "Sir, if we go public with this, there will be consequences, serious consequences. They'll deny it. They'll attack our credibility. They'll claim we're fabricating evidence to justify closer ties with China and Russia." I said, "Let them deny it. Let them attack our credibility. Let them claim whatever they want, because we have the evidence, and evidence doesn't care about their denials." The next morning I addressed the nation, live, unscheduled, no advance notice to foreign embassies, no diplomatic courtesy warnings, just truth, raw, unfiltered, undeniable. I stood in front of the cameras and told our people everything. The drone, the missiles, the targeting, the evidence, the 3 civilians who died because NATO tried to assassinate their president. I said, 17 days ago, NATO attempted to kill me, not because I'm a terrorist, not because I'm a threat to international security, but because I refused to obey. Because I chose sovereignty over submission, because I built partnerships they didn't approve, because I exposed their surveillance, because I demanded respect instead of accepting control. I said, they tried to kill me with the same drones they claim are protecting Africa from terrorism. They tried to murder me with the same weapons they say are defending our security. They tried to assassinate me under the same operational authority they claim is about counter-terrorism cooperation. I said, and they killed 3 innocent civilians instead. 3 Burkina who were simply driving on a road, 3 people whose only crime was being near where NATO thought I would be. 3 families destroyed because a Western military alliance decided an African president who demands respect deserves death. The reaction was immediate, explosive, unprecedented. Within hours, the video had 10 million views. Within a day, 50 million. Within a week, over 200 million people had watched an African president accuse NATO of attempted assassination with evidence to support every word. The international response was chaos, absolute chaos, because they weren't prepared for this. They weren't ready for an African leader to expose them with documentation. They weren't expecting evidence. They weren't anticipating that we'd have the capability to track their drone, recover their missiles, analyze their weapons, and prove their guilt. NATO issued a statement within 6 hours. Carefully worded, deliberately vague, predictably dishonest. NATO is aware of allegations made by President Traoré. We categorically deny any involvement in attacks on civilian or government targets in Burkina Faso. NATO operates in the Sahel region under strict rules of engagement, focused exclusively on counter-terrorism operations. We are committed to investigating these claims thoroughly. Notice what they didn't say. They didn't deny operating drones in our airspace. They didn't deny firing missiles that night. They didn't deny that American-made Hellfire missiles killed 3 Burkina civilians. They just denied involvement while promising to investigate themselves. The American ambassador requested an urgent meeting. I made him wait 3 days. Not out of spite, but to make a point. When they try to assassinate you, you don't grant them immediate access. When they murder your citizens, you don't offer diplomatic courtesy. When he finally arrived, he came with a delegation, military attaché, intelligence liaison, legal advisor. They were preparing for confrontation. I didn't give them the chance to control the narrative. I said, Ambassador, I'm going to show you something. And then you're going to sit there silently while I explain exactly what it means. I displayed the evidence on a large screen, radar tracking data showing the drone's flight path, communications intercepts showing coordination with a NATO command center, missile fragments with serial numbers traced to American military inventory, electronic signature data proving targeted tracking of a moving convoy. I let them look at it, let them absorb it, let them understand that we had everything. Then I said, this is an act of war. You attempted to assassinate a sitting head of state. You violated our sovereignty. You murdered our civilians. Under international law, we have the right to respond militarily. We have the right to declare war. We have the right to seek collective defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. The ambassador went pale. He said, Mr. President, I assure you this was not authorized at the highest levels. This must be a mistake, a targeting error, a tragic accident. I said, a mistake? Your drone tracked my convoy for 17 minutes. Your missiles adjusted course to follow a moving target. Your weapons struck exactly where we would have been if we hadn't diverted. That's not a mistake. That's precision. That's intent. That's attempted murder. He said, even if what you're saying is true, and I'm not conceding that it is, going public with these allegations damages our relationship irreparably. It undermines counter-terrorism cooperation. It threatens regional stability. I said, our relationship? You tried to kill me and you're worried about our relationship? You murdered 3 of my citizens and you're concerned about cooperation? You committed an act of war and you're talking about stability? I leaned forward. Let me be absolutely clear about something. There is no relationship. There is no cooperation. There is no partnership. There is only the fact that you tried to kill me and failed. And now the whole world knows it. He tried a different approach. Mr. President, if you pursue this publicly, there will be consequences. Economic consequences, diplomatic consequences. Your international standing will suffer. Your access to Western markets will be restricted. Your aid will be cut. I smiled. Actually smiled. because the threat was so absurd given the context. I said, "You just tried to kill me with a drone strike, and now you're threatening me with sanctions? You just murdered 3 civilians, and now you're warning me about diplomatic consequences? You just committed an act of war, and now you're talking about aid cuts?" I said, "Ambassador, you've already done your worst. You've already tried to kill me. Everything else is just noise. Sanctions? I've survived those. Isolation? I've endured that. Economic pressure? I've built alternatives. But assassination? That's your final card, and you played it, and you failed." I said, "So threaten me with whatever you want, cut whatever aid you want, impose whatever sanctions you want, because you've already shown me that you're willing to kill me if I don't obey. And once you know someone is willing to kill you, their other threats become meaningless." The meeting ended with no resolution, no agreement, no path forward. Just the cold reality that they had tried to kill an African president and failed, and now that president had evidence and wasn't afraid to use it. But let me tell you what happened next, because this is where the story becomes extraordinary. This is where my survival becomes their nightmare. This is where one failed assassination attempt triggers consequences they never anticipated. Within 72 hours of my public accusation, 17 African nations issued statements of support, not generic diplomatic statements, strong, specific condemnations of NATO's actions. Demands for investigation, calls for accountability. The African Union convened an emergency session, passed a resolution condemning the attack, established a commission to investigate NATO operations across the continent, demanded full transparency about drone strikes, targeting protocols, and civilian casualties. But more importantly, something else happened, something that terrified Western powers more than any diplomatic resolution. African nations started demanding that NATO leave, not requesting, demanding. Mali expelled French forces. Niger terminated security agreements. Chad closed Western military bases. Senegal suspended cooperation protocols. One by one, countries that had hosted Western military presence for decades started showing them the door. And they all cited the same reason. If NATO will attempt to assassinate President Traoré for demanding sovereignty, what will they do to us? If they'll murder civilians in Burkina Faso to eliminate a leader who won't obey, how safe are our people? If they'll commit acts of war against nations that choose independence, how can we trust them? The failed assassination of one African president triggered the collapse of Western military presence across an entire region. The drone strike that missed me hit something far more valuable to them: their legitimacy, their credibility, their claim to be protecting Africa rather than controlling it. I received a call 3 weeks after the attack, from a European leader, not through official channels, a private line, a quiet conversation, the kind of call that never gets recorded or reported. He said, "President Traoré, we need to find a way to de-escalate this situation. The allegations you've made are damaging relationships that took decades to build. Surely we can reach some accommodation." I said, "Accommodation? You tried to kill me. What accommodation exists for attempted murder?" He said, "What do you want? What would it take for you to soften your position, to allow for a more nuanced interpretation of events?" I understood immediately. He was offering a bribe, money, aid, investments, whatever I wanted in exchange for backing down, for changing my story, for allowing them to escape accountability. I said, "I want you to understand something. I'm not accusing NATO because I'm angry. I'm not exposing this because I want revenge. I'm not pursuing this because I seek compensation. I'm doing this because 17 days ago, you tried to kill me for demanding respect. And if I let that go unanswered, every African leader who demands respect will know they can be killed for it too." I said, "So no, there is no accommodation, there is no softening. There is no nuanced interpretation. You tried to kill me, I have proof, and the world will know." He hung up without another word. But the calls kept coming, from other leaders, from diplomats, from intermediaries, all of them with the same message. Can we make this go away? Can we find a solution? Can we move past this? And my answer was always the same: no. Because this isn't about me. This isn't about one assassination attempt. This isn't about one failed drone strike. This is about establishing a principle that African leaders cannot be killed for demanding sovereignty, a principle that Western powers cannot assassinate presidents who refuse to obey, a principle that there are consequences for treating African lives as expendable. Let me tell you about the 3 civilians who died that night, because they're not just statistics, they're not just collateral damage, they're people, with names, with families, with lives that mattered. Amadou Diallo, 43 years old, father of 5, truck driver transporting goods from Ouagadougou to Dori. He was on that road because it was his route, his job, his livelihood. He died because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, because NATO's missile struck near his truck, because someone decided killing an African president was worth killing whoever happened to be nearby. Fatoumata Ouedraogo, 28 years old, teacher. She was traveling to visit her sick mother in a village north of the capital. She died instantly when the second missile hit. Her mother waited 3 days before anyone told her that her daughter was dead. Killed by a weapon fired by an alliance that claims to protect African civilians. Ibrahim Sawadogo, 16 years old, student. He was riding in Amadou's truck, helping with deliveries to earn money for school fees. He had dreams of becoming an engineer. He wanted to build infrastructure in Burkina Faso. He wanted to develop his country. He died before he could do any of it. Because NATO decided an African teenager's life was worth less than eliminating an African president who wouldn't obey. I met their families. I attended their funerals. I looked into the eyes of Amadou's 5 children and tried to explain why their father died. I held Fatoumata's mother as she wept and asked me why God took her daughter. I listened to Ibrahim's classmates describe his dreams and his ambitions and his hopes for a future he'll never see. And I made them a promise I intend to keep. I promised them that their loved ones would not die in vain, that their deaths would mean something, that the world would know what NATO did, that there would be accountability, that African lives would be valued, that this would never happen again. That promise is why I'm still pursuing this, why I won't accept accommodation, why I won't soften my position, why I won't allow nuanced interpretation, because 3 families lost everything so NATO could try to kill me, and if I let that go unanswered, their deaths mean nothing. I established a commission to investigate all NATO operations in Burkina Faso over the past decade, every drone flight, every strike, every target, every civilian casualty, everything. What we found was horrifying. Over the past 8 years, NATO drones conducted 473 strikes in Burkina Faso. They claimed all of them were targeting terrorists. They claimed all of them were precision operations. They claimed civilian casualties were minimal and unavoidable. They lied. Our investigation documented at least 214 civilian deaths from NATO drone strikes, 214 people, men, women, children, killed by missiles fired by drones operated by an alliance that claims to be protecting us. Wedding parties struck because someone thought they saw a terrorist. Funerals bombed because gatherings looked suspicious. Markets hit because intelligence was wrong. Villages destroyed because coordinates were incorrect. Family homes obliterated because someone made a mistake. And in every case, NATO issued the same statement. We regret any civilian casualties. We take all possible precautions. We investigate thoroughly. We remain committed to protecting civilians. But they never changed. They never stopped. They never faced consequences. They just kept killing, kept striking, kept making mistakes, kept claiming they were protecting us while they were killing us. I released the full report publicly. All 473 strikes, all 214 civilian deaths, all the evidence of negligence, mistakes, and complete disregard for African lives. The international response was silence, deafening silence. Western media barely covered it. NATO didn't respond. The UN didn't investigate. Human rights organizations issued mild statements. And life went on as if 214 dead Africans didn't matter. That silence told me everything I needed to know. It told me that African lives are expendable, that Western powers can kill us with impunity, that there is no accountability for crimes committed against African people, that the international system doesn't protect us. It protects them. So I made a decision that would change everything. A decision that would transform my survival from a personal story into a continental movement. I announced the formation of the African Sovereignty Defense Initiative, a coalition of African nations committed to ending Western military presence on our continent, committed to building our own security capabilities, committed to defending ourselves without depending on powers that see us as expendable. 12 nations joined immediately: Mali, Niger, Chad, Guinea, Zimbabwe, Eritrea, Tanzania, Central African Republic, Sudan, Mauritania, Congo-Brazzaville, Equatorial Guinea. 12 nations that said enough. Enough surveillance, enough drone strikes, enough civilian casualties, enough treating African lives as less valuable than Western strategic interests. Enough assassination attempts, enough control disguised as protection. We established collective defense protocols. If NATO attacks one of us, they attack all of us. If they attempt to assassinate one leader, they declare war on all of us. If they kill civilians in one country, they answer to all of us. We're building integrated air defense systems, sharing intelligence, training together, developing capabilities, creating security infrastructure that doesn't depend on Western approval or Western presence. And most importantly, we're documenting everything. Every drone flight, every violation of our airspace, every strike, every casualty. We're building an evidence base that will one day hold them accountable, that will one day prove what they've done, that will one day ensure justice for every African killed by Western weapons. NATO is panicking. Not because 12 African nations formed a coalition, but because those 12 nations have evidence. Evidence of drone strikes, evidence of civilian casualties, evidence of assassination attempts, evidence that proves Western military presence in Africa is about control, not protection. They're panicking because we're not asking for permission anymore. We're not seeking their approval. We're not depending on their cooperation. Making our own decisions, defending our own sovereignty. They're panicking because they tried to kill me and failed, and my survival became a symbol that African leaders can resist, can demand respect, can expose Western crimes, can build alternatives, can survive. Let me tell you what I learned from surviving that drone strike. What 17 days of knowing NATO tried to kill me taught me about power and fear and courage. I learned that they're afraid, deeply afraid, not of our militaries, not of our economies, not of our populations, but of our independence, of our refusal to obey, of our determination to be free. I learned that their control depends on our fear, on us believing they're too powerful to resist, on us accepting that challenging them means death, on us surrendering before they even have to threaten. I learned that surviving their worst attack breaks their power, because once you survive what you thought would kill you, nothing they threaten afterward matters. Once you know they've already tried to kill you and failed, sanctions and isolation and economic pressure become irrelevant. I learned that evidence is power, that documentation defeats denial, that proof forces accountability, that showing the world what they did matters more than diplomatic courtesy or international relationships. And I learned that my survival isn't just about me. It's about every African leader who will come after me, every president who will demand respect, every government that will choose sovereignty, every nation that will build independence. Because if I had died that night, the message would have been clear: defy the West and die, demand sovereignty and be killed, choose independence and be assassinated. But I survived. And the message is different now. The message is, they will try to kill you, but you can survive. They will attack you, but you can resist. They will threaten you, but you can expose them. They will try to silence you, but you can speak louder. That's what my survival means. That's what this moment represents. That's what shocked NATO more than anything else. Not that they missed, but that I'm still here, still speaking, still leading, still defying, still building, still free. To every African leader watching this, they will come for you too. Maybe not with drones, maybe not with missiles, but they will come with sanctions, with coups, with pressure, with threats, with whatever tools they have to maintain control. And when they come, remember this: I survived. They tried to kill me and failed. They tried to silence me and I spoke louder. They tried to break me and I built stronger. You can survive too. You can resist too. You can build too. You can be free too. But you have to be willing to risk everything. You have to be prepared for their worst. You have to document everything. You have to expose them publicly. You have to build alternatives. You have to unite with others. You have to refuse to surrender. And most importantly, you have to understand that once they try to kill you, you have nothing left to lose. Once they show you they're willing to murder you, their other threats become meaningless. Once they reveal they see you as expendable, you're free to fight without fear. To the people of Africa, 17 days ago, NATO tried to kill your president. They failed. And what happened next is bigger than one assassination attempt, bigger than one failed drone strike, bigger than one leader's survival. What happened next is a movement of African nations saying enough, enough control, enough exploitation, enough treating our lives as expendable, enough killing our leaders who demand respect. But let me tell you exactly what this movement looks like, because it's not abstract, it's not theoretical, it's concrete, it's real, it's happening right now across this continent. 3 days after I exposed the assassination attempt, I received a call from President Goïta of Mali. He didn't go through diplomatic channels. He called my personal line at 2 in the morning. His first words were, "Brother, they tried to kill you. They'll try to kill me next. We need to talk." We talked for 3 hours about sovereignty, about threats, about survival, about what it means to lead African nations that refuse to obey Western demands, about the price of independence and whether that price is worth paying. He told me something I'll never forget. He said, "When I heard they tried to drone strike you, my first reaction wasn't shock, it was recognition. Because I've been waiting for them to try it with me, I've been expecting it. Every time I travel, every time I leave the capital, I wonder if today is the day they decide I'm too much trouble to tolerate." He said, "But hearing that you survived, hearing that you exposed them, hearing that you're still fighting, that changed something for me. Because I realized I don't have to wait for them to try. I don't have to live in fear of when they'll decide I'm expendable. I can act first. I can build defenses. I can create alternatives. I can unite with others who face the same threats." That conversation became the foundation of the African Sovereignty Defense Initiative, not a formal treaty drafted by diplomats, not a carefully negotiated agreement reviewed by lawyers, but a commitment between leaders who understand that our survival depends on unity, that our sovereignty requires collective defense, that our freedom demands we stand together. Within a week, 12 nations had joined. Not because we promised them economic benefits, not because we offered military aid, not because we provided security guarantees, but because every leader who joined understood one simple truth. If NATO will try to kill me for demanding respect, they'll try to kill anyone who demands respect. If they'll drone strike a president in Burkina Faso, they'll drone strike a president anywhere in Africa. If they consider one African leader expendable, they consider all of us expendable. President Tiani of Niger was the second to join. He called me and said, "They've been pressuring us for months, demanding we allow more French troops, insisting we need their protection, threatening consequences if we refuse. But your survival proved something. It proved we don't need their protection. We need protection from them." He told me about a conversation he had with a French general 3 months before the assassination attempt on me. The general had said, "Mr. President, you need to understand something. Niger cannot survive without French military presence. The terrorists will overrun you. Your government will collapse. Your people will suffer. You need us." President Tiani said he had believed it. He had accepted it as fact. He had structured his entire security policy around the assumption that Niger needed France more than France needed Niger. But then they tried to kill me, and everything changed. He said, "When they tried to assassinate you, I realized something. If they're willing to kill a president who builds alternatives to their presence, then their presence isn't about protecting us. It's about controlling us. They don't want us to be secure. They want us to be dependent. They don't want us to be safe. They want us to need them." He said, "So I told that French general to leave. I told him Niger doesn't need protection from terrorists. Niger needs protection from people who think African presidents can be killed for demanding sovereignty. And then I called you." President Déby of Chad joined next. His reasoning was different but equally powerful. He said, "My father was killed. Everyone knows it. Everyone suspects who was behind it. But nobody could prove it. Nobody had evidence. Nobody could hold anyone accountable. He died, and the world moved on, and nothing changed." He said, "But you have evidence. You have radar data. You have missile fragments. You have documentation. You can prove what they did, and that changes everything. Because now African leaders who are killed don't just disappear into history. Now there's proof. Now there's accountability. Now there's a record that will outlast all of us." He said, "I'm joining this initiative not just to protect myself, but to ensure that if they kill me, the world will know. If they assassinate me, there will be evidence. If they try to make me disappear, there will be documentation. My death won't be mysterious. It won't be unexplained. It won't be forgotten. That's what we're building. Not just military defense, not just security cooperation. A continental commitment to recording every violation, every attack, every crime committed against African leaders and African people. We established the African Evidence Archive. Sounds bureaucratic, sounds technical, but it's revolutionary. Every member nation contributes data, radar tracking of unauthorized flights, documentation of drone strikes, records of civilian casualties, evidence of assassinations, proof of violations. All of it stored in multiple locations, all of it backed up across the continent, all of it protected by the strongest cybersecurity we can build, all of it ready to be released if any of us are killed. All of it ensuring that our deaths won't be swept under diplomatic rugs or explained away as accidents or forgotten in the noise of international relations. President Mnangagwa of Zimbabwe joined and brought something unexpected: experience. He survived an assassination attempt in 2018, a bomb at a political rally. He knows what it's like to be targeted. He knows what it's like to wonder who tried to kill you and whether they'll try again. He told me, when you survive an assassination attempt, you have two choices. You can become paranoid, isolated, afraid, or you can become fearless, bold, unstoppable, because you've already faced death. You've already survived your worst nightmare, and nothing they threaten afterward is worse than what you've already survived. We met in Harare 3 weeks after the drone strike. Not a formal state visit, not an official summit. Just two men who had survived what was meant to kill them, sitting in a private room, sharing experiences that most people can't imagine. He showed me the scar on his leg, still visible, still a reminder. He said, "This is from the blast, shrapnel. The doctors said I was lucky, 6 inches higher and it would have severed my femoral artery. I would have bled out before reaching the hospital." He said, "But I don't feel lucky. Lucky implies chance, random fortune, being in the right place at the right time, but I wasn't in the right place. I was exactly where they wanted me. At that rally, on that stage, in the kill zone they'd carefully prepared." He continued, "What saved me wasn't luck, it was timing. I had bent down to pick up something just as the bomb detonated. That split-second movement, that tiny change in position, that's what kept me alive. Not luck, physics, geometry, the mathematics of survival." I understood exactly what he meant, because my survival wasn't luck either. It was the Chinese radar system that detected the drone. It was the security chief who trusted the alert. It was my decision to divert immediately. It was preparation meeting opportunity. It was capability meeting crisis. He said, "After the bombing, I spent weeks trying to understand who did it. The investigation went nowhere. No arrests, no evidence, no accountability. Just suspicions and theories and political accusations that led nowhere concrete." He said, "But I knew. Deep down, I knew. Because you don't survive in African politics for decades without understanding how power works. You don't lead a nation through sanctions and pressure and isolation without recognizing the patterns. You don't challenge Western interests without learning what happens to leaders who go too far." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "My father fought in the Liberation War. He told me stories about how the Rhodesian regime targeted independence leaders, how they used bombs, poison, assassinations, how they made it look like accidents or internal conflicts, how they eliminated threats while maintaining plausible deniability. He said, the methods have changed, the technology is more sophisticated, the weapons are more precise, but the strategy is the same: eliminate leaders who won't cooperate. Make it look like something else, deny involvement, move on." He said, "When I heard about your drone strike, when I saw the evidence you presented, I felt something I hadn't felt since my own bombing. Validation, not satisfaction, not vindication, but validation. Confirmation that what I suspected was true. Proof that what happened to me wasn't an isolated incident but part of a pattern." I asked him, "Why didn't you expose it? Why didn't you present evidence like I did?" He smiled sadly. "Because I didn't have evidence like you do. I had suspicions, theories, circumstantial connections, but not radar data, not missile fragments with serial numbers, not electronic signatures proving targeting, not documentation that could withstand international scrutiny." He said, "You have something I didn't have: Chinese technology that detected the threat, systems that documented the attack, capabilities that provided proof. That's why your exposure worked. That's why the world is listening. That's why NATO is panicking, not because you accused them, but because you proved it. He told me about the aftermath of his bombing, the paranoia that followed, the security measures that became suffocating, the constant awareness that someone had tried to kill him and might try again. I stopped attending public rallies for months. He said, every crowd became a threat, every gathering became a potential kill zone, every moment in public became a calculation of risk versus necessity. He said, my security team wanted me to wear body armor everywhere, to travel in armored convoys, to limit public appearances, to live like a man under siege, and for a while, I did. Because I was afraid, because I had survived once and didn't want to test fate twice. He said, but then I realized something. If I lived in fear, they had won, not completely. They hadn't killed me, but they had changed me. They had made me smaller. They had reduced my leadership. They had limited my impact, and in some ways that's almost as effective as killing me. He said, so I made a choice, the choice I told you about, to become fearless instead of paranoid, to be bold instead of isolated, to be unstoppable instead of afraid. He said, I started attending rallies again. Not recklessly, not without security, but publicly, visibly, defiantly, showing that I was still here, still leading, still fighting, still free. He said, and something interesting happened. The more visible I became, the more defiant I appeared, the less threatened I felt. Not because the danger decreased, but because I stopped letting the danger control me. I stopped giving them the power to make me afraid. I understood this deeply. Because after the drone strike, I faced the same choice. Hide or lead. Retreat or advance. Let fear control me or control fear. I chose to be more visible, not less. I traveled more frequently, not less. I attended more public events, not fewer. Not because I'm suicidal, not because I'm reckless, but because leadership requires presence, because sovereignty demands visibility, because freedom means refusing to let threats dictate your actions. President Mnangagwa said, but there's something else I learned, something more important than overcoming fear. I learned that surviving an assassination attempt gives you a kind of authority, a credibility that can't be manufactured or faked. He said, when you tell other leaders that Western powers will try to kill them if they resist, they can dismiss it as paranoia, as exaggeration, as political rhetoric. But when you show them the scar from the bomb that tried to kill you, when you display the evidence of the drone that tried to kill you, it's not rhetoric anymore. It's reality. It's documented. It's undeniable. He said, that's why I joined your initiative immediately. Not just for protection, not just for solidarity, but because together we have something powerful. We have proof. We have experience. We have credibility. We have the authority that comes from surviving what was meant to kill us. He told me about a conversation he had with a younger African president, a leader who had been hesitant about challenging Western demands, who had been cautious about building alternative partnerships, who had been afraid of the consequences of independence. President Mnangagwa showed him the scar, told him about the bombing, explained the investigation that went nowhere, described the years of wondering who tried to kill him and whether they'd try again. And then he said to that young president, this is what happens when you challenge them. Not always, not immediately, but eventually, when you become too independent, when you demand too much respect, when you build too many alternatives, they come for you. With bombs or drones or coups or sanctions, they come for you. He said the young president went pale, asked if he was serious, asked if this really happened, asked if Western powers really assassinate African leaders. President Mnangagwa lifted his pant leg, showed the scar again, said, this is my answer, this is my proof, this is what happens when you forget that our sovereignty threatens their control. That young president joined our initiative 2 weeks later. President Mnangagwa said, that's the power of survival. Not just that we lived, but that we can show others what we survived. We can prove that the threats are real. We can demonstrate that the danger is genuine. We can validate what everyone suspects, but nobody wants to believe. He said, most African leaders live with a quiet fear, a background anxiety that if they go too far, if they demand too much, if they resist too strongly, something will happen. They'll be cooped, they'll be sanctioned, they'll be isolated, or worse. He said, but it's abstract, it's theoretical, it's something that happens to other people in other countries at other times. It's not immediate, it's not personal. It's not real enough to overcome the temptation to cooperate, to comply, to accept Western terms. He said, but when they see us, when they hear our stories, when they examine our evidence, it becomes real, it becomes immediate, it becomes personal, and that changes their calculation. Because suddenly the threat isn't theoretical, it's documented, it's proven, it's undeniable. I asked him, do you ever regret it? Do you ever wish you had been more cautious, more compliant, more willing to accept their terms? He looked at me like I had asked the most absurd question imaginable. Regret surviving, regret standing, regret demanding respect? Never, not for a single moment. He said, I regret that someone tried to kill me. I regret that African leaders face this choice. I regret that sovereignty comes with such a high price, but I don't regret paying that price. Because the alternative is worse. He said, the alternative is living as a puppet, governing with permission, leading at their discretion, serving their interests while pretending to serve my people. That's not leadership. That's performance. That's theater. That's slavery with a presidential title. He said, I'd rather be a president who survived an assassination attempt than a president who never needed to be assassinated because he never threatened anyone's control. I'd rather have this scar than have the shame of knowing I sold my people's sovereignty for my personal safety. He said, and here's what they don't understand. Here's what they miscalculated. Every assassination attempt that fails makes us stronger. Every bombing that doesn't kill us makes us bolder. Every drone strike that misses makes us more determined. He said, because we've faced death and survived. We've confronted their worst and endured. We've experienced what they hoped would break us, and it made us unbreakable instead. That's not leadership. That's performance. That's theater. That's slavery with a presidential title. He said, I'd rather be a president who survived an assassination attempt than a president who never needed to be assassinated because he never threatened anyone's control. I'd rather have this scar than have the shame of knowing I sold my people's sovereignty for my personal safety. He said, and here's what they don't understand. Here's what they miscalculated. Every assassination attempt that fails makes us stronger. Every bombing that doesn't kill us makes us bolder. Every drone strike that misses makes us more determined. He said, because we've faced death and survived. We've confronted their worst and endured. We've experienced what they hoped would break us, and it made us unbreakable instead. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out over Harare. You know what I see when I look at this city? I see a nation that survived sanctions, that endured isolation, that persisted through pressure, that refused to break even when breaking seemed inevitable. He turned back to me. And you know what that taught me? That survival is a skill, that endurance is a strategy, that persistence is power. That refusing to surrender, even when surrender seems rational, is the ultimate form of resistance. He said, they tried to kill me in 2018. I'm still here, still leading, still resisting, still building, and every day I survive is a day they failed. Every decision I make independently is a decision they couldn't control. Every partnership I build outside their system is a partnership they couldn't prevent. He said, that's what I brought to your initiative. Not just my experience surviving an assassination attempt, but my experience turning survival into power. My knowledge of how to live with the constant awareness that they might try again. My understanding of how to lead effectively while knowing that leadership makes you a target. He said, and most importantly, I brought proof. Proof that this isn't new. Proof that you're not the first. Proof that there's a pattern. Proof that what happened to you is part of a systematic effort to eliminate African leaders who demand too much sovereignty. He said, together, we're not just two presidents who survived assassination attempts, we're documentation, we're evidence, we're proof of a pattern, and patterns can be exposed. Patterns can be documented, patterns can be stopped. He shook my hand. They tried to kill both of us. They failed both times. And now we're united. Now we're building. Now we're creating something they can't destroy by killing one or two leaders. We're a continental awakening. He said, I chose fearless, bold, unstoppable, and I see you've chosen the same. Now let's be fearless together, because 12 fearless African leaders are harder to kill than one. And a continent of fearless nations is impossible to control. That conversation changed how I understood my own survival. It wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about Burkina Faso. It was about establishing a pattern of resistance. about proving that African leaders can survive assassination attempts, about demonstrating that sovereignty is achievable even when powerful forces want you dead. President Mnangagwa taught me that survival is the first step, but turning survival into power is the second step. Using survival to inspire others is the third step. Building a movement of survivors who refuse to be controlled is the final step. We're on that final step now. Building something they can't stop, creating something they can't destroy, establishing something that will outlast all of us. Because we've already faced death. We've already survived our worst nightmare. And nothing they threaten afterward is worse than what we've already survived. He said, I chose fearless, and I see you've chosen the same. Now let's be fearless together, because 12 fearless African leaders are harder to kill than one. And a continent of fearless nations is impossible to control. We're building something they can't stop, a network of sovereign nations, a coalition of independent governments, a continent that defends itself, an Africa that doesn't ask permission, that doesn't fear threats, that doesn't surrender to pressure. But let me be specific about what we're actually building, because this isn't just rhetoric, this isn't just speeches and statements, this is infrastructure, this is capability, this is power. First, we're building integrated air defense. Every member nation is installing Chinese-made radar systems, the same systems that detected the drone that tried to kill me, the same technology that gave me 4 minutes warning, the same capability that saved my life. These systems are networked, connected across borders, sharing data in real time. When a drone enters Burkina airspace, Mali knows. When an unidentified aircraft crosses into Niger, Chad is alerted. When suspicious flight patterns emerge over Guinea, the entire network is informed. We're creating a continental early warning system, not dependent on Western satellites, not relying on NATO data, not trusting intelligence from people who tried to kill us, our own systems, our own networks, our own capability to see what's happening in our own skies. Second, we're building shared intelligence. Every assassination attempt, every coup plot, every destabilization effort, every piece of evidence we gather is shared across the network. What one nation learns, all nations know. What one government discovers, all governments can access. This shared intelligence has already proven valuable. 2 months after the assassination attempt on me, Niger detected unusual activity. Foreign operatives entering the country. Suspicious meetings with opposition figures, money transfers from Western intelligence agencies. The pattern was clear. They were preparing something. Niger shared this intelligence with the network. We analyzed it collectively. We identified the threat. We coordinated response. And we stopped a coup attempt before it could begin. Not because Niger had perfect intelligence, but because 12 nations working together have better intelligence than any single nation working alone. Third, we're building economic resilience, because we know that when military assassination fails, economic assassination follows. When drones don't work, sanctions do. When missiles miss, aid cuts hit. We're creating alternative financial systems, trade agreements that don't depend on Western approval, currency arrangements that don't require Western banks, investment partnerships that don't come with Western conditions. We're building an economic architecture that can survive Western pressure because it doesn't depend on Western participation. The African Continental Free Trade Area is our foundation, but we're going further. We're creating a sovereignty defense fund. Every member nation contributes based on GDP. The fund provides emergency support to any nation facing economic retaliation for choosing independence. When sanctions hit, the fund responds. When aid is cut, the fund compensates. When economic pressure is applied, the fund provides alternatives. This fund has already been used twice. When Mali expelled French forces, France cut aid. The fund replaced it. When Niger terminated security agreements, the EU froze assistance. The fund covered the gap. We're proving that economic threats only work if you're alone. But we're not alone anymore. Fourth, we're building military capability, not to invade anyone, not to threaten anyone, but to defend ourselves, to protect our sovereignty, to ensure that our independence is backed by power, not just by words. We're pooling resources to purchase advanced defense systems, anti-aircraft missiles, electronic warfare equipment, cyber defense capabilities. Everything we need to make assassination attempts harder, coup plots riskier, foreign interventions costlier. We're training together. Joint exercises, shared doctrine, coordinated response protocols, so that if one of us is attacked, all of us can respond. so that threatening one African nation means confronting 12 African nations, so that the cost of intervention becomes too high to justify. Fifth, and most importantly, we're building narrative power, because the battle isn't just military or economic, it's informational. It's about who gets to tell the story, who gets to define what happened, who gets to shape global perception. For too long, Western media controlled the narrative about Africa. They decided which stories mattered. They determined which leaders were legitimate. They shaped how the world understood African events. And they used that power to justify interventions, support coups, and maintain control. We're changing that. Every member nation is investing in media infrastructure, Pan-African news networks, continental social media platforms, alternative information channels that don't depend on Western technology or Western approval. We're telling our own stories, broadcasting our own truth, sharing our own evidence. And the world is listening. Because authenticity is powerful. Because documentation is undeniable. Because truth, when properly presented, defeats propaganda. The assassination attempt on me has been viewed over 200 million times. Not because Western media covered it, they barely mentioned it, but because we documented it, we shared it. We made it impossible to ignore. We bypassed their media gatekeepers and spoke directly to the world. That's the power we're building. The power to speak. The power to document. The power to share truth without asking permission from people who profit from hiding truth. They tried to kill me to stop this. They failed, and now it's unstoppable. Because you can kill a leader, but you can't kill an idea whose time has come. You can assassinate a president, but you can't assassinate a movement. You can drone strike an individual, but you can't drone strike a continent awakening to its own power. Every day, more nations inquire about joining. Every week, more leaders reach out. Every month, the network grows stronger. What started with 12 nations will be 20 within a year, 30 within 2 years, eventually the entire continent. Because every African leader faces the same choice I faced: obey and survive in comfort, or resist and risk everything. And increasingly, leaders are choosing resistance, not because it's easy, not because it's safe, but because it's right, because sovereignty matters, because dignity has value, because freedom is worth fighting for. To NATO, you made a mistake, not the mistake of missing your target, the mistake of trying in the first place, because you showed us what we already suspected, that you see African leaders as obstacles to be eliminated, that you view our sovereignty as a threat to be destroyed, that you consider our lives expendable in pursuit of your control. And now we know. Now we have proof. Now we have evidence. Now we have documentation. And now we're united in response. Let me tell you what your mistake cost you, what you lost when that Hellfire missile missed my convoy and killed 3 civilians instead. You lost legitimacy. For decades, you claimed to be in Africa to protect us, to fight terrorism, to promote stability, to defend democracy. The assassination attempt exposed that lie. You're not here to protect us, you're here to control us, and when we refuse control, you try to kill us. You lost credibility. You can't claim to respect sovereignty while attempting to assassinate presidents. You can't talk about partnership while conducting drone strikes on allies. You can't promote democracy while eliminating democratically elected leaders. The contradiction is too obvious. The hypocrisy is too clear. You lost monopoly. For decades, you were the only option for African security, the only source of military training, the only provider of defense equipment, the only partner for counterterrorism. But your assassination attempt drove us to find alternatives, to build relationships with China, Russia, Turkey, Iran, anyone who doesn't try to kill us. You created the competition you feared by making cooperation with you too dangerous. You lost access. Nation after nation is expelling your troops, closing your bases, terminating your agreements. Not because they love our new partners more than they loved you, but because they trust our new partners won't try to kill them. That's a low bar, and you couldn't clear it. You lost the future. An entire generation of African leaders watched you try to kill me. They saw the evidence. They heard my speech. They witnessed your denials, and they learned. They learned that Western partnership comes with the risk of assassination. They learned that demanding respect can get you killed. They learned that sovereignty has a price, and that price might be paid in blood. But they also learned something else. They learned that you can survive, that you can resist, that you can expose them, that you can build alternatives, that you can unite with others, that you can be free. And that lesson is more powerful than all your drones, more influential than all your aid, more lasting than all your military presence, because that lesson will shape African leadership for generations. You can't kill all of us. You can't assassinate every African leader who demands respect. You can't drone strike every president who chooses sovereignty. You can't murder your way to continued control. The mathematics are simple. You tried to kill one leader and created 12 committed opponents. If you try to kill one of those 12, you'll create 100. If you try to kill 100, you'll create 1,000. Each assassination attempt multiplies resistance. Each drone strike strengthens resolve. Each murdered leader inspires 10 more to stand. You're facing exponential opposition, and you created it yourselves by trying to kill me, by thinking assassination was a solution, by believing African leaders could be eliminated without consequence. And even if you could kill all of us, even if you could assassinate every resistant leader, even if you could drone strike your way to submission, we've documented everything, every strike, every casualty, every crime, every violation, and one day there will be accountability. One day there will be justice. One day the world will know what you've done. The African Evidence Archive contains documentation of 473 drone strikes, 214 civilian deaths, 17 assassination attempts on African leaders over the past decade, hundreds of coup plots, thousands of violations of sovereignty, all of it documented, all of it preserved, all of it ready to be released. We've created a dead man's switch. If enough of us are killed, if enough leaders are assassinated, if enough nations are attacked, the entire archive goes public. Every document, every piece of evidence, every proof of every crime, released simultaneously to every media outlet in the world. Impossible to suppress, impossible to deny, impossible to ignore. You're not just fighting 12 African leaders. You're fighting history. You're fighting documentation. You're fighting evidence that will outlast all of us. You're fighting truth that can't be killed with drones. What will I tell my grandchildren when they ask what I did during Africa's moment of awakening? What will I say when they ask how I responded when NATO tried to kill me? I will tell them their grandfather survived, not through luck, not through accident, but through preparation, through building systems that detected the threat, through making decisions that saved lives, through having the courage to divert when every instinct said to stay the course. I will tell them I exposed them, not quietly, not diplomatically, not through proper channels, but publicly, loudly, with evidence they couldn't deny, with documentation they couldn't suppress, with truth they couldn't hide. I will tell them I united others, not through forcing agreement, not through demanding loyalty, but through showing that resistance is possible, through proving that survival is achievable, through demonstrating that alternatives exist. I will tell them I built alternatives, not by rejecting all partnerships, not by isolating ourselves, but by diversifying relationships, by creating options, by ensuring we're never again dependent on partners who see us as expendable. I will tell them I refuse to be silenced, not because I'm brave, not because I'm fearless, but because silence would have meant accepting that African leaders can be killed for demanding respect. Silence would have meant agreeing that our lives are expendable. Silence would have meant surrendering the sovereignty I was elected to defend. I will tell them I chose to fight rather than surrender, not because fighting was easy, not because victory was certain, but because surrender was unacceptable, because submission was worse than death, because living on your knees is not living at all. And they will know their grandfather was free, truly free, completely free, permanently free, not because he was never attacked, but because he survived the attack and kept fighting, not because he was never threatened, but because he faced the threat and didn't back down, not because he was never afraid, but because he chose courage over fear. I was afraid that night. When the alert came, when my security chief said we needed to divert, when I made the decision that saved our lives, I was terrified. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing. My mind was calculating the odds of survival. But I made the decision anyway. I gave the order to divert. I chose survival over routine. I prioritized safety over schedule, and that choice saved my life. Fear doesn't make you weak. Fear is information. Fear tells you the stakes are real. Fear reminds you that death is possible. Fear focuses your mind on what matters. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is making the right decision despite fear. Courage is acting when action is dangerous. Courage is standing when standing might get you killed. I was afraid, and I acted anyway. That's what I'll tell my grandchildren. That their grandfather felt fear and chose courage. That he faced death and chose life. That he confronted threats and chose resistance. 17 days ago, NATO tried to kill me. They failed. And what happened next shocked them more than they could have imagined. I'm still here, still leading, still speaking, still building, still free. Every morning, I wake up knowing I survived what was meant to kill me. Every day, I lead knowing they might try again. Every night, I sleep knowing I've built systems that make success harder for them and survival more likely for me. I'm still here, and that fact alone is victory, because they wanted me gone, they needed me silent, they required my elimination, and I denied them. By surviving, by speaking, by exposing, by uniting, by building. And I'm not alone anymore. 12 nations stand with me, millions of Africans support me, a continent is awakening behind me. President Gowida called me last week. He said, "Brother, I sleep better now, not because the threats have decreased, but because I know I'm not alone. I know that if they try to kill me, 11 other nations will respond. I know that if they assassinate me, my death will be documented. I know that if they eliminate me, the movement continues." That's what we've built. Not just defense against assassination, but assurance that our deaths won't be meaningless, that our sacrifices won't be forgotten, that our resistance will continue even if we fall. They tried to silence one voice. They created a chorus. I was one leader demanding respect. Now there are 12. Soon there will be 20. Eventually there will be 50. The chorus grows louder with each nation that joins. The message becomes clearer with each leader who stands. The movement becomes stronger with each government that resists. They can't silence a chorus by eliminating one voice. They can't stop a movement by killing one leader. They can't defeat a continent by assassinating one president. They tried to eliminate one leader. They inspired a movement. I was just one president, one voice, one nation, significant to Burkina Faso, but not necessarily to the continent, important to my people, but not necessarily to the world. But the assassination attempt changed that. It made me a symbol, not because I'm special, not because I'm uniquely brave, but because I survived, because I exposed them, because I proved that resistance is possible. Now I'm not just a president, I'm proof. Proof that they can be defied, proof that they can be exposed, proof that they can be resisted, proof that African leaders who demand respect can survive even when powerful forces want them dead. And that proof inspires others. Presidents who were afraid are now emboldened. Leaders who were hesitant are now committed. Nations that were uncertain are now resolved. They tried to kill one president. They awakened a continent. Africa was sleeping, not literally, but metaphorically, accepting the status quo, tolerating Western control, believing we had no alternatives, thinking resistance was impossible, assuming sovereignty was a dream rather than an achievable reality. The assassination attempt was an alarm, a wake-up call, a moment of clarity that revealed the truth we'd been avoiding. They don't see us as partners, they see us as subjects. They don't want us to be strong, they want us to be dependent. They don't respect our sovereignty, they tolerate it only as long as we don't actually exercise it. And when we do exercise it, when we actually demand respect, when we truly choose independence, they try to kill us. That truth is waking Africa up. Nation by nation, leader by leader, person by person, the continent is opening its eyes to reality, and reality is radicalizing. We are Africa, we are sovereign, we are free. Not aspirationally, not theoretically, not in some distant future, but now, today, actually, really, completely. We are sovereign because we exercise sovereignty. We make our own decisions. We choose our own partners. We defend our own interests. We determine our own future. We are free because we act free. We don't ask permission. We don't seek approval. We don't wait for authorization. We build what we need. We create what we want. We become what we choose. And we will never surrender that freedom again. Not to threats, not to pressure, not to sanctions, not to drones, not to missiles, not to assassination attempts, not to anything. Because we've seen their worst. And we survived. The worst thing they could do, they did. They tried to kill me. They failed. And in failing, they revealed their weakness. They showed that assassination isn't a guaranteed solution. They demonstrated that African leaders can build defenses. They proved that resistance is survivable. And now we're building something they can't destroy. An Africa that defends itself. An Africa that documents their crimes. An Africa that demands accountability. An Africa that refuses to be controlled. We're building it with Chinese radar systems that detect their drones. We're building it with shared intelligence that exposes their plots. We're building it with alternative partnerships that reduce our dependence. We're building it with economic resilience that withstands their pressure. We're building it with military capability that raises the cost of intervention. We're building it with narrative power that tells our truth. And most importantly, we're building it with unity. 12 nations now, more joining constantly, a network that grows stronger with each addition, a coalition that becomes more powerful with each member, a continent that awakens more fully with each passing day. They tried to kill me. I survived. And Africa is awake.